Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome back to the History AI podcast, folks. I'm Chuck, your go-to guy for historic storytelling that doesn't make you doze off in your armchair.
And I'm Marco, here to keep Chuck honest and throw in my 2 cents of witty banter. We've got a great episode lined up today, all thanks to one of our fantastic listeners who suggested we dive into the world of Russian composers.
That's right. We love your suggestions, so keep sending them in. Russian composers was a request on our social media, so we're taking your advice and giving the people what they want. Today, we're peeling back the layers on none other than Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, one of the most legendary figures in the history of classical music.
Tchaikovsky, the man who gave us the Nutcracker, Swan Lake, and, of course, that rousing 1812 overture that makes you want to salute, toast, and duck for cover from imaginary cannons all at once.
Exactly, Marco. But there's so much more to his life than these iconic pieces. Tchaikovsky's story is one of triumph, heartbreak, creativity, and struggle. So, buckle up, folks, because we're about to venture into 19th century Russia. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky's story begins on May 7, 1840, in Votkinsk, a small industrial town in the Ural Mountains of Russia. It was a place surrounded by factories and dense forests, not exactly a hotspot for cultural development. His father, Ilya Petrovich Tchaikovsky, worked as a mining engineer and served as the director of a local ironworks, while his mother, Alexandra Andreevna, came from a French lineage and brought a touch of refinement and European influence into the household.
So Tchaikovsky's early years were rooted in practicality with a hint of elegance?
Exactly, Marco. Life at the Tchaikovsky household was a blend of strict discipline and affection. Pyotr was the second eldest of 6 surviving children, and the family had enough financial stability to afford a modestly comfortable lifestyle. But here's an interesting twist. Although his parents recognized his musical talent early on, they saw it more as an embellishment to his upbringing rather than a serious career path.
Which wasn't unusual back then, right? Music was considered more of a genteel skill rather than a profession for the upper middle class.
Exactly. Pyotr's mother played the piano and sang, exposing him to music from an early age. One of his earliest memories was of his mother singing French and Russian songs to him, which left a profound imprint on his musical psyche. He also received some basic piano instruction, enough to ignite his passion for music but not enough to satisfy the budding virtuoso within him.
Wasn't there a bit of a heartbreak early on as well?
Yes. When Pyotr was 10, his life took a dramatic turn. In 1850, his parents enrolled him in the Imperial School of Jurisprudence in Saint Petersburg, a government institution designed to groom young boys for a career in civil service. This move was standard practice for families who wanted to see their children secure well-respected jobs, but for Pyotr, it was a bittersweet transition.
I can't imagine being sent to a school that far from home at that age. It must have been rough.
It was, and the separation was made worse by a personal tragedy. Just 2 years after Pyotr left for St. Petersburg, his mother, Alexandra, succumbed to cholera. Pyotr was only 14 when he got the news, and her death left a wound that never fully healed. He idolized his mother, and her loss became a source of deep emotional pain that resonated throughout his life and work.
That had to have a huge impact on him. Do you think this grief influenced his music?
Without a doubt. Tchaikovsky's early exposure to intense emotions laid the groundwork for the expressive depth seen in his later compositions. At the Imperial School of Jurisprudence, although his official studies focused on preparing him for a legal career, Pyotr never abandoned music. He often found solace at the school's piano and devoured whatever musical material he could get his hands on. There are even stories of him composing small pieces and experimenting with melodies during his free time.
So, here we have this young student, doing legal studies by day and moonlighting as a composer by night. That's some dedication.
It really is. Despite the rigorous academic environment, Pyotr's passion for music persisted. After graduating in 1859 at the age of 19, he began working as a clerk at the Ministry of Justice. But the job was mundane, and it wasn't long before he realized that a life behind a desk wasn't for him. The call of music was too strong to ignore.
That's when things started to change, right?
Exactly. In 1861, he made a pivotal decision to enroll in music theory classes at the newly founded Saint Petersburg Conservatory, founded by Anton Rubinstein, a significant figure in Russian music who played a critical role in Pyotr's musical development. This was a bold move, considering that music was still seen as a hobby rather than a career, especially in Russia at the time. Under Rubinstein's mentorship, Tchaikovsky's raw talent was refined, and he absorbed a solid foundation in Western European musical traditions.
Rubinstein was tough, though, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Anton Rubinstein was known for his strict standards and meticulous attention to detail. But Pyotr thrived under this pressure. By 1863, Tchaikovsky had left his government job entirely to pursue music full-time, marking the start of what would become an illustrious yet challenging career.
So, the stage was set. He had the education, the drive, and a touch of early tragedy fueling him.
Exactly. This period of his life was a melting pot of raw talent, loss, and newfound purpose, a combination that would later define his compositions. Little did the world know, this young man, once a clerk in the Ministry of Justice, would soon compose some of the most iconic works in classical music history. By the time Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky left the Ministry of Justice and committed to a life in music, he was well on his way to establishing himself as a force in the Russian musical landscape. But let's not sugarcoat it, his journey to fame was neither quick nor easy. The years following his studies at the Saint Petersburg Conservatory were marked by a mix of professional triumphs and deeply personal battles.
I can imagine that stepping into the music scene in 19th century Russia was no simple feat. Weren't the musical circles quite polarized at that time?
You're spot on, Marco. The Russian music world in the mid-19th century was a battleground of ideologies. On one side, you had the Mighty Handful, a group of nationalist composers led by Mali Balakirev, who believed Russian music should be distinct from Western European influence. On the other side were those who valued classical training and the integration of Western traditions, a camp championed by Anton Rubinstein and later, Tchaikovsky.
So, where did Tchaikovsky fall in this debate?
He was caught in between. Tchaikovsky's style was a blend of Russian folk elements and European classical techniques, which drew both admiration and criticism. His early works, like Romeo and Juliet, a piece initially criticized but later hailed as a masterpiece, exemplified this hybrid approach. His mentor, Anton Rubinstein, encouraged this blend, and under his influence, Tchaikovsky honed his ability to craft sweeping, emotional melodies set against intricate orchestration.
I read that Romeo and Juliet actually went through a couple of versions before it got the acclaim it deserved. Talk about resilience.
That's true. The original 1869 version received mixed reviews, and Tchaikovsky was devastated by the initial reception. But Balakirev, despite being a tough critic and leading a rival musical camp, offered him constructive feedback. Tchaikovsky took it to heart and revised the piece, finally striking gold with its famous love theme, which we know today as one of the most romantic motifs in classical music. But while his career began to gain momentum, his personal life was another story. Tchaikovsky struggled deeply with his mental health. Living in a society that was unforgiving toward his sexuality, he endured constant inner turmoil. He knew that being openly homosexual in Tsarist Russia was not an option. The secrecy, fear, and isolation he faced often seeped into his music, creating works that were as tragic as they were beautiful.
And it wasn't just societal pressure that weighed on him, right? I remember reading that Tchaikovsky had a rather complicated relationship with his family.
That's putting it mildly. Tchaikovsky was very close to his siblings, especially his younger brother, Modest, who shared his passion for literature and the arts. But there was tension with some members of his family over expectations and his chosen path. His father, Ilya, was supportive but had practical concerns, particularly as Pyotr faced the financial instability that came with being a composer.
Which brings us to the infamous marriage. This was a move that seemed doomed from the start.
It was indeed. In 1877, Tchaikovsky impulsively married Antonina Miliakova, a former student who had become infatuated with him after writing him a series of letters expressing her admiration. Tchaikovsky, desperate to silence the rumors about his private life and align with societal norms, agreed to marry her. The marriage was disastrous from the beginning, marked by misunderstanding and emotional distance.
So, it was more of a facade than a real relationship.
Precisely. They were wildly incompatible, and the marriage took a severe toll on Tchaikovsky's mental state. Within weeks, he was overwhelmed by a deep sense of dread and regret. It became so unbearable that he fled to Saint Petersburg and, shortly afterward, attempted to end his life by wading into the freezing waters of the Moskva River. Though he didn't succeed in harming himself, it was clear that the situation was unsustainable. He separated from Antonina but supported her financially for the rest of his life.
Despite all this chaos, he was at the peak of his creativity, wasn't he?
He was. Ironically, some of Tchaikovsky's most celebrated works were composed during or shortly after this tumultuous period. It was in 1877, the year of his marriage, that he began work on Symphony No. 4, which he later described as a reflection of fate's power over human existence. The symphony is powerful, with its thunderous opening fanfare symbolizing inevitable destiny, a direct echo of Tchaikovsky's own struggles.
And isn't that also the time when his collaboration with Nadezhda von Meck began?
Yes, and it was a game-changer. Nadezhda von Meck, a wealthy widow and patron of the arts, was captivated by Tchaikovsky's music. She reached out and offered to financially support him on the condition that they never meet in person. Their relationship blossomed into a remarkable 13-year correspondence, exchanging hundreds of letters filled with discussions about music, life, and their inner thoughts.
So, she was like a lifeline for him, both financially and emotionally.
Exactly. Her patronage allowed Tchaikovsky to leave his teaching position at the Moscow Conservatory and focus entirely on composing. This era produced some of his most famous works, including Eugene Onegin, Swan Lake, and the Violin Concerto. But even this bond wasn't immune to hardship. In 1890, von Meck abruptly cut off their relationship, citing financial difficulties, though many historians believe it may have been due to personal or familial pressures.
I can't imagine how that must have felt after years of such a deep, albeit unconventional connection.
It was devastating for Tchaikovsky. He felt betrayed and isolated once again, and this loss compounded the emotional struggles he'd faced throughout his life. Yet, in true Tchaikovsky fashion, he channeled that pain into his music. His Symphony No. 6, the Pathétique, is often seen as a culmination of all these experiences, a profound exploration of melancholy, fate, and, ultimately, mortality.
So, by the late 1880s and into the 1890s, Tchaikovsky was a celebrated composer, known not just in Russia but across Europe. But inside, he was still fighting his own battles.
Exactly, Marco. His fame and success did little to soothe the internal struggles he faced. Tchaikovsky's life was a balancing act between public triumphs and private torment, but it's this complexity that made him a master of evoking raw emotion through music.
Now, Chuck, we can't talk about Tchaikovsky without giving a nod to the Nutcracker.
Oh, definitely. It premiered in 1892 and has become synonymous with the holiday season, but guess what? It wasn't an immediate hit. Critics were lukewarm, calling it too childlike, which, if you ask me, is kind of the point.
Right? Fast forward to now, and it's arguably one of the most performed ballets of all time. It's wild how perspectives can change.
Indeed. But while Tchaikovsky enjoyed his successes, his personal life remained turbulent. His death in 1893, just 9 days after the premiere of Symphony No. 6, is still surrounded by controversy. The official cause was cholera, allegedly contracted by drinking unboiled water.
But, of course, there are those juicy theories that it might have been less accidental.
Exactly. Some historians propose it was suicide, possibly linked to threats over exposure of his private life. Regardless of how it happened, Tchaikovsky left behind a legacy that reshaped the world of music.
And here we are, over 130 years later, still mesmerized by his works. It's not just the beauty of the music, it's the way Tchaikovsky captured the human experience so vividly.
Well said, Marco. Whether it's the triumph in 1812 Overture, the whimsy of the Nutcracker, or the haunting notes of Pathétique, Tchaikovsky's music continues to touch hearts across generations.
So, to our listeners, Next time you hear a piece by Tchaikovsky, remember the man behind the notes, a genius, yes, but also someone who channeled his personal battles into something universally beautiful.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the History AI podcast. We hope you enjoyed learning more about Tchaikovsky. And special thanks to our listener who suggested today's topic. Keep those suggestions coming on social media.
And don't forget, if you loved this episode, please rate us 5 stars, subscribe, and share it with your friends. It really helps our podcast grow and reach more history buffs like you.
Plus, check out our new merch linked in the show notes. You won't want to miss it.
Until next time, stay curious.
Discover the dark, enchanting world of Shadowed Journeys, the tales of Jordan and Squishy. Follow Jordan, a seemingly innocent girl with a hidden power, and her loyal companion Squishy, who reincarnates into different animals after each battle. Venture into the ominous depths of the Whispering Woods as they face fierce creatures and uncover ancient secrets. Will Jordan succumb to the darkness within, or will she find the strength to forge a new destiny? Perfect for fans of dark fantasy and epic quests, this spellbinding tale will captivate and leave you pondering the fine line between hero and villain. Dive into Shadowed Journeys today. Available on Amazon now.